Abram stands in the king's valley, his sandals heavy with the dirt and dried blood of 4 defeated empires. He is exhausted. He walks onto the page out of nowhere, takes 10% of the spoils from the very man God chose to build a nation. He writes a song of cosmic authority. And then, right in the center of the poetry, the ink spells out a sentence that violates the very laws his nation is built upon. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. 1,000 years of silence, broken by a single verse. David does not explain who this ancient man is. He does not provide historical commentary. He simply drops the phantom name into the holiest liturgy of Israel and leaves it there. He is prophesying a future ruler who will tear down the wall between the throne and the altar. A king who will not need a Levitical grandfather to validate his ministry. A king whose priesthood will not be inherited through human genetics and will not be interrupted by a human grave. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a tectonic shift. The shadow from the king's valley has just eclipsed the entire Levitical system. The bread and the wine have just outlasted the blood of millions of bulls and goats. David sets the pen down. The psalm is finished. Another 1,000 years of absolute biblical silence will cover the name of the shadow king. The Babylonians will come, speaks a blessing into the desert air, and then vanishes just as quickly. 3 verses in a book of origins. 1 single sentence in a royal psalm. The Romans will conquer. The temple will be built, destroyed, and rebuilt again. But the ticking clock has started, because centuries later, a group of exhausted, terrified Christians will unroll a letter, and the priest from nowhere is about to walk out of the shadows one final time. The letter to the Hebrews is written to people who are bleeding out. They are losing their properties. They are losing their physical safety. They are watching their families dragged into Roman courts. And they are tempted to go backward. They are tempted to walk away from the invisible Christ and return to the visible temple, to the heavy limestone walls, to the thick, choking smell of burning animal fat, to the familiar comfort of a high priest wearing a jeweled breastplate they can actually touch. The writer of Hebrews has to stop them. He has to prove that the old religious system is a sinking ship. He has to dismantle the Levitical priesthood brick by brick, right in front of their eyes. And he does it by exposing its fatal flaw. The system relies on frail, broken men. Think about the Levitical priests. They get tired. They get sick. Their hands shake as they carry the heavy bronze sacrificial bowls. They have to slaughter a bull for their own failures, written a millennium later. And then an explosion of ink, 3 entire chapters in a New Testament letter written to a terrified church. Same shadow, same king, before they are even legally allowed to carry the blood for yours. The system is not a cure for the human condition. It is a management of the bleeding. It is an endless loop of repetition. A priest serves his term. A priest slaughters the animals. A priest burns the incense. And then, a priest stops breathing. It is a conveyor belt of mortality. Death constantly interrupts the ministry. Every time a high priest is buried in the rocky soil of Judea, the connection to God is paused. The people have to wait for the son to wash himself, put on the linen garments, and step into the empty shoes. They have to hope the next man in the genetic line is actually righteous. The writer of Hebrews looks at his exhausted, terrified audience. He knows they want the comfort of the physical temple, but he tells them the physical temple is dying. He reaches past Moses. He reaches past Aaron. He reaches 1,000 years into the past to Psalm 110, and another 1,000 years back to a bloody valley in Genesis. He pulls the king of Salem into the 1st century. He tells them that Jesus did not come to join the Levitical system. He came to replace it entirely. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of the shadow. Most people assume this is just a bizarre historical cameo, a strange, slightly uncomfortable footnote in the story of Abraham. But to truly feel the weight of this replacement, you have to watch the old priesthood reach its absolute limit. You have to step back into the ancient dust, climb a jagged mountain, and watch a high priest strip off his robes for the final time. 3 men walk slowly up the jagged limestone spine of Mount Hor. The desert wind pulls at their robes. The air is thin, and the oldest man's breathing is shallow, ragged, and failing. This is Aaron, the brother of Moses, the first high priest of the nation. He carries the sacred breastplate, the heavy gold settings, pressing 12 precious stones against his chest. But the holy stones cannot stop his lungs from shutting down. The sacred anointing oil poured over his head decades earlier cannot prevent his heart from giving out. Moses turns to his brother near the summit. The command from God is devastatingly practical. Moses reaches out and unclasps the intricate woven garments. He pulls the ephod off his brother's shoulders. He strips the high priest, down in the cold, thin mountain air. He takes the heavy, sweat-stained fabric and places it onto the shoulders of Aaron's son, Eleazar. And then, Aaron lies down on the hard stone and exhales his final breath. The first high priest is a corpse, a random encounter with a local chieftain that early readers didn't know what to do with, so they just glossed over it. The second high priest is standing over him, weeping in his father's clothes. This is the terrifying vulnerability of the Old Covenant. The entire mechanism for dealing with human failure is suspended on the fragile biology of a human body. The men assigned to carry the blood of atonement into the Holy of Holies are themselves quietly turning back into dust. When the Christians in the first century are tempted to abandon Jesus and go back to the temple, they are tempted to go back to a system run by ghosts. They are trusting their eternal security to men who cannot even secure their own tomorrow. Death is not a tragic interruption to the Levitical priesthood. It is the necessary mechanism that keeps the system moving forward. Every high priest is a dying man offering sacrifices for dying people. The ledger of ancestry is just a long, meticulously kept list of graves. This is the theological nightmare the writer of Hebrews is trying to dismantle. He looks at his terrified audience, people desperate to cling to the physical temple and the visible priests, and he points them away from the mountain of corpses. He points them back to the king in the valley, the shadow figure who walks onto the page with bread and wine and never walks off. And to prove that Jesus operates in this exact, but if you track this man through the scriptures, that assumption completely shatters. If you follow his name from this valley of blood to the throne room, unbreakable order, the writer drops a single, staggering Greek word into his argument, a word that appears nowhere else in the entire New Testament. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 16. The writer makes his final, crushing contrast. The Levitical priests inherited their roles based on a legal requirement concerning bodily descent. They held the office because of a genetic ledger. But this new priest arrives differently. He arrives on the power of an indestructible life. The word the author uses for indestructible is the Greek akatalutos. It is a massive, violent word. It appears only this one time in the entire New Testament. It is a compound. The prefix means not or without. The root is kataluo, which means to dissolve, to tear down, to shatter a physical structure into pieces. When Jesus prophesied that not one stone of the Jerusalem temple would be left standing, he used the root word kataluo. The physical walls will be torn down. The physical bodies of the old priests will dissolve in the dirt. The genetic bloodlines will eventually snap. But this new priesthood is akatalutos. It cannot be dissolved. It cannot be dismantled. It cannot be torn down. That single word changes everything. His qualification is not a line of dead ancestors. It is a life that cannot be killed. This is why Melchizedek had no recorded mother, of King David. And finally, into the sweeping theological arguments of the first century. You begin to see the architecture of a massive, hidden design. This is why he had no recorded father. This is why his death was intentionally scrubbed from the Genesis scroll. The silence of Genesis is not missing information. It is a prophetic shadow. It was pointing to a priest who steps out of a cold tomb on a Sunday morning with a pulse that will never stop. A priest who never has to climb a mountain to hand his blood-stained robes to his son. A priest who never has to leave the presence of God because his body gives out. The conveyor belt of mortality is finally broken. And because he never has to leave the sanctuary, What he does with his own blood on the other side of the veil changes the security of the human soul forever. The 10th day of the 7th month arrives. The high priest stands alone in the dim light of the holy place. The thick, heavy fabric of the curtain looms in front of him, woven with the imposing figures of cherubim, smelling heavily of centuries of frankincense and dried animal blood. He holds a golden basin filled with the blood of a goat. He takes a slow breath, pushes past the heavy tapestry, and disappears into the absolute darkness of the Holy of Holies. This ancient king is not a footnote. He is the blueprint. He is the shadow cast backward through time by a reality that had not yet arrived. Outside the tent, an entire nation holds its collective breath. They are listening desperately for the faint, rhythmic ringing of the golden bells sewn into the hem of his garments. As long as they hear the metallic chime echoing from behind the veil, they know he is moving. As long as he is moving, they know God has accepted the sacrifice, and their fragile representative is still alive. The anxiety of the moment is crushing. He carries the weight of their survival. But he is only a visitor in that sacred room. He sprinkles the blood on the golden lid of the ark, and then he must retreat. He backs out through the curtain, his hands shaking, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. He cannot stay. The old system requires the priest to constantly leave the presence of God, because his work is never actually finished. Now, watch what the writer of Hebrews does with the shadow of Melchizedek. He tells these exhausted first-century Christians that their new high priest has also walked behind the curtain. But he did not carry the blood of a goat, and he did not nervously back out of the room. And to understand how this phantom priest unlocks the entire biblical story, you have to look closely at what he does not have. When the job was done, he walked into the cosmic, eternal Holy of Holies, carrying the absolute currency of his own blood. And then he did something no Levitical priest was ever permitted to do. He sat down. He took a seat at the right hand of the Majesty on high. His presence behind the veil is not a temporary diplomatic mission. It is a permanent occupation. The writer of Hebrews calls this reality an anchor for the soul, firm and secure, entering the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. When an ancient Roman ship was caught in a lethal Mediterranean storm, the sailors would put the massive iron anchor into a smaller rowboat, carry it into the safety of the harbor, and drop it out of sight beneath the water. The massive ship was still outside in the dark, still being battered violently by the wind and the waves. But it was tethered to a rock it could not even see. That is the exact image of this priesthood. The fragile believers are the ship, battered by the Roman courts, battered by the failing biology of their own bodies, and the indestructible priest is the anchor, already inside the harbor, locked permanently into the throne room of heaven. You have to look at what the text deliberately refuses to tell you, because in ancient literature, a missing detail is never an accident. But how does a phantom priest from the book of Genesis change the way you walk through the wreckage of your own life? Abram fought a brutal war in a dusty valley, and a phantom king met him with bread and wine. A scribe recorded the origins of a nation, and he erased a genealogy to build an eternal shadow. David sat on a cedar throne in Jerusalem, and he prophesied a priesthood that would outlast the world. Aaron climbed a jagged mountain to die in the cold, and he exposed a religious system built on frail ghosts. A terrified church trembled in a Roman storm, and a writer pointed them to an anchor locked behind the veil. A savior stepped out of a tomb with an indestructible pulse, and the conveyor belt of human mortality finally shattered. The King of Righteousness poured out his own blood, and he became the absolute King of Peace. 2 titles. 1 eternal priest. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the valley. The moment the King of Salem actually steps out into the blood and the dust of Genesis 14, the smoke of the northern skirmishes still clings to his robes. He has just won a brutal war he never intended to fight. It is an anchor, and a first-century writer is about to drop that anchor into the deepest waters of the human soul. He does not demand a political tax. He does not offer a military alliance. He brings the rough crust of baked grain and the dark red of crushed grapes directly into a battlefield littered with severed limbs and exhausted soldiers. His arrival is not a demand for performance. It is a provision of peace. If you are in a season where you feel like you are standing in the wreckage of your own battles, this ancient shadow was written for you. If you are exhausted by the sheer effort of holding your life together, terrified that your frail human strength is finally going to give out, look at who is walking onto the battlefield. He does not ask for a flawless pedigree. He does not require you to clean yourself up before he approaches. He walks into the chaos of your life, carrying the exact provision you could not secure for yourself. If this opens something up in you, subscribe and leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted by their own wilderness and needs to know they have an anchor behind the curtain. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God who holds an indestructible life read the book of Genesis, and you immediately notice a rhythm. It is a ledger of blood and breath. Ancient Near Eastern literature is obsessed with lineage. Walk out to meet you in your lowest valleys and hand you a peace you could never win on your own. And the Hebrew scriptures elevate this obsession to an art form. Genealogy is the currency of authority in the ancient world. You do not just declare yourself a king, and you certainly do not declare yourself a priest without proof. You produce the baked clay tablets. You trace the names backward through the dust of dead ancestors to prove you have the right to hold the scepter or the sacrificial knife. We are given entire chapters dedicated to the rhythmic drumming of names. Adam begot Seth. Seth begot Enosh. We know the exact ages of men whose only recorded theological contribution was to breathe, reproduce, and be buried in the sand. Genesis is a closed system of ancestry. It demands a biological origin for every significant figure. Until chapter 14. Melchizedek steps onto the page without a father. He has no mother. He has no listed genealogy. There is no record of his birth. And crucially, there is no record of his death. In a text that meticulously tracks the biological credentials of every minor chieftain and wandering nomad, this one king is left entirely untethered from human history, chasing an invading coalition across the ancient Near East in the dead of night to rescue a nephew who never should have been there. You can almost feel the heavy silence on the parchment, the deliberate pause of the scribe's hand. Centuries later, when the nation of Israel is formed in the wilderness, the rules for priesthood will become violently strict. To be a priest, you must be born from the tribe of Levi. To be the high priest, you must be a direct descendant of Aaron. If your genealogical records are lost, if the physical scroll cannot be found in the archives, you are stripped of your linen robes and exiled from the altar. Your bloodline is your only access to the presence of God. The physical ledger is everything. Yet here, at the very beginning of the biblical story, the father of the Israelite nation bows down to a priest who defies every rule his descendants will eventually write. Most readers gloss over this omission, assuming the writer simply did not know the man's background or did not care to include it. But ancient scribes did not waste expensive ink, and they did not leave gaping structural holes by accident. The silence of the text is not an oversight. It is a theology. By deliberately refusing to give this priest king a beginning or an end, the narrative creates an eternal silhouette. It presents a man whose authority does not come from human ancestry, whose priesthood is not inherited from a dying father. The valley floor is a chaotic collision of sound and heat. You can hear the panicked bleating of stolen livestock, and whose right to rule is not validated by a biological ledger. He simply is. He arrives fully formed, holding absolute authority, validating a priesthood that exists entirely outside the rigid, fragile system that will later dominate the biblical world. He is an anomaly designed to break the system before the system even begins. And this anomaly does not just stand there. In the silence of his missing genealogy, the mystery deepens the moment he extends his hands toward the exhausted patriarch. Because what he brings into the violent heat of that ancient valley is something that will echo all the way to a wooden table in an upper room in Jerusalem. The dust settles in the valley of Shaveh, 4 eastern kings lie dead. Their armies are scattered across the desert. Abram stands in the center of the wreckage. He breathes in the sharp scent of sweat, camel hair, and rusted bronze. He has won the war. He has rescued his nephew. He has captured the wealth of nations. The king of Sodom steps out of the shadows. He makes a standard ancient demand. Give me the people. Keep the gold. But Abram ignores him, because another figure is approaching, a man holding bread, a man carrying wine. Feel the weight of those objects. The rough, heavy crust of baked grain, the rhythmic gasping of tired soldiers, the clattering of reclaimed bronze and silver falling into the dust. And then, a sudden stillness cuts through the noise. The deep, dark red of crushed grapes sloshing in a clay pitcher. In a valley littered with swords and severed limbs, these items are violently out of place. Look at the contrast between the two kings standing before Abram. Sodom demands. Salem provides. Sodom negotiates. Salem bless. Sodom deals in human bodies and cold metal. Salem deals in sustenance and peace. Melchizedek raises his voice over the blood-stained patriarch. He blesses Abram. He blesses God Most High, the creator of heaven and earth. And then Abram does something shocking. He reaches into the massive pile of captured wealth. He measures out 10%. The gold, the silver, the livestock, the weapons. He hands it all to a man with no army and no royal pedigree. This is not a political tax. It is an act of total submission. Abram rejects the wealth of Sodom. He refuses to take even a single thread or a leather sandal strap from the wicked king. He will not let Sodom say, "I made Abram rich." But he surrenders a tenth of his greatest victory to the priest from nowhere. The father of the promised nation kneels in the dirt. The lesser submits to the greater. The victor bows to the provider. The bread is eaten. The wine is poured on the dry earth. The moment freezes in the historical record. A man walks out of a fortified Canaanite city and steps into the valley. He wears no armor. He is not flanked by a standing army. He gives Abram physical strength for the journey home. He gives him spiritual covering for the violence he just committed. A priest who holds no lineage. A king who wields no weapon. A communion meal set on a battlefield. It is a scene so brief you can read it in 30 seconds. But its architecture is mathematically perfect. Bread and wine offered by a priest king to a man who will become the father of faith. It takes 1,000 years for the biblical text to mention this man again. But to understand why he echoes so loudly, you have to look at the words Genesis actually uses to describe him. You have to look at his title. There is a detail hiding in plain sight on the ancient scroll. Look at Genesis chapter 14, verse 18. The English translations treat the man's identity as a standard proper noun and a geographic location. Melchizedek, king of Salem. But in ancient Near Eastern literature, names are rarely just labels used to identify a person in a crowd. The names are not labels. They are prophecies. The name translated as Melchizedek is the Hebrew compound word Malki-tzedek. It comes from two distinct roots. Melech, which means king. In a brutal, ancient world where kings only ever meet to conquer or to surrender, this man does neither. He simply approaches the patriarch. And Zedek, which means righteousness, justice, or doing what is morally absolute. His very identity, the name spoken over him, translates literally as the King of Righteousness. But the text immediately attaches a second title to his identity. He is the king of a region called Salem. The word for Salem here is the Hebrew shalem. It shares the exact same linguistic root as a word you likely already know, shalom. It means peace, wholeness, the restoration of all fractured things to their proper design. He is the King of Peace. If something about these hidden layers of language is stirring up questions you've never considered, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So the ancient scribe presses these two profound titles into the dry parchment side by side. First, the King of Righteousness. Then, the King of Peace. In human history, these two concepts are almost always at war with each other. Kings who pursue strict righteousness usually achieve it through the edge of an iron sword, violently punishing the wicked and crushing their enemies to enforce the law. Kings who pursue absolute peace often achieve it by compromising on justice, turning a blind eye to evil, or paying off their enemies just to stop the bloodshed. Holding two ordinary things in his hands: bread and wine. He is not named in the chapter prior. He will not be named in the chapter following. You can have a king of justice, or you can have a king of peace. Humanity rarely gets both. Look at Psalm 85. Written centuries later by the sons of Korah, they write a poetic vision of a future restored world. And in verse 10, they describe an impossible reality. Righteousness and peace kiss each other. They are describing a cosmic reunion between two fractured ideals that human leaders can never seem to hold together. This is why the dual titles of this ancient priest matter so deeply. True peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of justice. By holding both titles simultaneously, Melchizedek and Shalem, this shadow figure embodies the impossible paradox. He rules a kingdom where moral perfection and total tranquility coexist. He is a walking, breathing preview of the Messianic kingdom, dropped right into the middle of a violent, blood-soaked valley in the book of Genesis. And then, the parchment goes quiet. He vanishes from the biblical narrative as abruptly as he arrived, leaving only bread, wine, and a blessing hanging in the desert air. But the silence surrounding him is not a deletion, because exactly 1,000 years later, a king sits in Jerusalem and picks up a pen. He has no recorded father, no recorded mother, and no listed ancestors in a book where genealogy is the exact currency used to prove a person's legitimacy. David sits on a cedar throne in Jerusalem. The city is his. But 1,000 years ago, this very soil was called Salem. He looks out over the limestone walls. The air is thick with the sharp smell of roasting meat and burning frankincense drifting up from the tabernacle. He can hear the rhythmic chanting of the Levitical priests as they slaughter the morning sacrifices. David is the greatest king Israel has ever known, but he is strictly forbidden from walking into that courtyard to offer the blood himself. He is from the tribe of Judah. Judah holds the scepter, but they do not hold the knife. If a king from Judah tries to touch the altar, the holy presence will strike him with leprosy or drop him dead in the dust. The throne and the priesthood are separated by an impenetrable wall of biological pedigree. David picks up a reed pen. The tip scratches against the rough, dried animal skin of the parchment. He is composing a song, a royal coronation psalm. He is recording a divine conversation he overhears in the spirit, a decree from God to a future. Ultimate King, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand. He writes a song of absolute conquest. He writes a song of shattered enemies,